Hi, in this video we're gonna use the technique we've learned in the previous video on how to use the business process class to improve the migrated code and to learn on how to write the same functionality that we wrote before more effectively in new code. So our scenario is we have the order detail screen, we have the order and the order detail, and we have a total here, and the total here is being calculated by an inner class called totals, which basically goes to the orders table and collects all the rows and calculates their summary into the total field. So how can we reduce this code? And this is why quite a lot of code. We say here there's like 44 lines of code. How can we reduce this to just a few lines? Well, I'm going to start with using the technique we've seen before, and we're going to use it in a long way and later just remove things that we don't care anymore. Now, I don't know how many of you know about this little button, but we'll come back to that in a second. Let's see where totals is used. So we can see here that in the this one we don't care about, the detail screen we don't care about, the handlers here we don't care about, and we can see that on the onEnter row of the show orders controller we are calling the total inner class to calculate the total. Great. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this little icon over here. It actually allows me to take a single code file and view it with two scroll bars. So I can be here in the onEnter row, and here I can be in the inner class and take away things from it. Okay, so here we are in the line 205, and here I'm in line 88, and I can do and look at them both at the same time. So the goal here is to take the functionality in this class and put it here. And again, I'm going to start with the long way. I'm going to take all the functionality, and then I'm going to tear away functionalities that we don't need anymore. So first we can delete this because we're not going to call the inner class. And we're going to define the BP, our business process. Okay. Great. Next line in the business process, we defined the order details. So I'm going to take this over here. Okay. This line is equivalent to this line. Okay. And if we're going to follow this path, we need to take the title in. So let's take the title. We'll put it in the business process between parens because it's a property of the business process. We need the from. So we'll put this here as well. And of course we move the order details to be before it. So these few characters is the equivalent of this line of code. Then we're going to add the where. So we say bp.where. We're going to add to the where of the business process. Now previously we referenced the show order as the parent. But here we are in the context of show order, so we no longer need a parent. We can take that one away. We can take the order by, place it here, and here we can select the columns, but with its, okay, let's just use it for the fun. We can select the columns over here, and here's the trick, by the way. In Visual Studio I can press Alt, and then I can create a horizontal cursor, and here I'll be able to just type bp dot, and it will add it to all of these variables. So great, we've done this here. In the onload, we've set the row locking and transaction scope. Well, we can set those on the business process itself, or we can do them in the onload. Let's do them in the onload, just again for the sake of following the same code path. Plus equals lambda, and here we'll say bp dot and bp dot. Okay, so these lines here are the equivalent of this line over here. Perfect. Next we have the start, so we'll say bp start. I'll copy this line over here, and we can see that bp start is the equivalent of the onStart event, and we're getting there. Only row, And we'll copy this line to here, take away the parent, because we are now in the context of the show order, so we don't need the parent, and we'll do bp.run. Remember to do the bp.run last, okay? Because you're setting up the business process and eventually running it. Now this looks a bit cumbersome and later we're going to make it shorter, but let's first of all run it and see that it runs. Great. We can see that it runs exactly the same. So now let's recap just what we've done. We've added defined the entity, just like it's defined over here. We've defined the business process. We've set its properties based on the title, the from, and the order by. All of these go through here. Title, from, and order by. We've set the where. We've defined the columns. And then we've taken the events and included them in our code. The onload events, the onStart event, and the onLeave event. Perfect. So we were able to reduce the 44 lines of code. The totals include, and if you include the comment, it's even more, to these about 10 lines of code, I'm thinking. Let's see. Here I'm on line 88. Here I'm on line 101. Yeah, 13 lines. Great. So this is our first version. Let's run it, see that it works. And we are happier with it. Now let's start creating it and shortening it to make it easier. So let's just first of all commit our changes, see the changes. Okay. We can see here that we removed this line and replaced it with these lines, and eventually we deleted all of these lines. So we'll commit the change as replacing the totals inner class with a few lines of code using the business process class. Great. So this was step one. And this is not the way I would normally do it, because there's a lot of code here that is just here to support different scenarios in the migrated code and that I wouldn't really need in new code. So let's start going at it one by one. If you remember from the previous video, we can take these three lines, where, leave row, and run, and write them in just one line saying BP for each row, that will get the where as the first parameter, and what to do on the leave row as the second parameter. And we don't need the run anymore. Let's run this. Of course, we'll see that it's running. Great. And if we'll follow the changes, we can see that we were able to remove these lines and make it even shorter. One more thing that I'm going to do here, because this is a single line lambda, I don't need a curly bracket, so I can remove. Or let's do it in secondary command. Use for each row instead of where and leave row. And next I will take away this, this, and this. And let's look at the commit so we can see exactly what we've done here. Okay, we've taken away the curly brackets on both sides and the semicolon, and the reason we've done that is replace multi-line lambda with single line lambda. Perfect. Let's proceed. We can do the same here for the start, but you know something? we don't really need to do it as a start because the line here will happen before we run it, and that's actually what we're looking for. So we don't need to use the start event anymore. The start event happens when the business process starts, and it's going to start on the next line, so there's no point in putting it here. So I'll simply delete this. Okay, and again, let's review the changes. Okay, I've done Control KD, so it formatted it a bit, but we can see here that we replaced the start with its content, and we'll call it replacing the start event with code that runs before we run the business process. Great. Next, over here we have the onload event, and in it we have a lot of definition of row locking and transactions. We don't want it here. This code is here probably because when the application was written in Magic, these were the defaults and nobody knew or bothered to change them. But it added unnecessary complexity and unnecessary risk to a very simple task. It's just supposed to count something. So when we are creating a summary, we don't need transactions, we don't need row locking. So we simply don't need the onload event, and we don't even need this setting over here because we don't need row locking on the table as well. So let's recap on the change. Okay, and we say remove transactions and locking that are not necessary. And removing them has two values. One, the code is shorter and easier to understand, and the second part of it, it actually runs faster because all of this is overhead that needs to be managed. Great. Let's look at what else do we have here that we can use. Well, by defining these 4 lines over here, we are actually saying which columns do we want to include in the select statement. And although it has some theoretical benefit of just getting the 4 columns that you need, in most cases, when with normal tables that have like 10, 20 fields, this is just too much code to get too little benefit. And I prefer not to write it because it just makes my code longer, and I don't like code being longer. So I'll just take that away. And again, we'll go back to our changes and see that we don't need this anymore. Great. Say removing column selection. Great. Next, let's have a look at this long line over here. Title is meaningless. It will just appear in some debug tools and stuff. Again, not worth the effort, so we'll take it away. And also order by is meaningless because we don't need to order these rows. We just want to count them. It doesn't matter in which order we're counting them. So we're going to take those away as well. And let's edit here, removing unnecessary, forgive my spelling, order by and title. Now I'm removing it just because it's useless, and when I write new code I will never write it like that, so there's no point in keeping it here. And the next thing we can do is, just like before, we can see here that we've defined the business process here and we're only using it here, so we can inline it by saying this. So let's review the code. We define the table, we reset the total to 0, we define the business process that will run on the table, and for every row where order ID is equal to order ID, it will calculate this total. So we were able to take down 44 lines of code into 4 lines of code. So when you write new code, I strongly recommend to only write 4 lines of code instead of 44 lines of code. And we'll commit this as well. Final changes. Now before I leave, I would like to do one more thing. When I look at this code, I see something that I will probably do many places in my code. I will probably in many places in my code would want to have the total for a specific order. And it's a shame to have it written here explicitly in this controller. Well, as you know, we can put code anywhere, so why not put this in the orders table? Okay? Or even the order ID type if I want. It really depends on what I would like to do. You know something, let's see if we have an order ID type. We do, so let's put it in the type. I'll go to types, order ID, create a little split screen, we'll create a method here, public number get total. I will copy this here. I will say here var total equals 0. Okay, which will replace this line of code. I will take the entire business process and put it here. And let's make sure that it talks to me. So I'm going to say total is equal to total plus. And instead of saying order ID, I will just say this because I am in the order ID. Okay, so any order ID will now have this total. And I can even make this shorter by doing plus equals, because that's exactly what it means here. Add to the total, and eventually I will return the total. Okay. So now that I have here in the type, anywhere that I'm using this type, the total will be accessible for me. And if we go back to the code on the left, instead of saying v total value equals to whatever it was before, I can just say orders.orderID.get total. So we've taken this code, we put it in a place that it's easier to use it in, and we can see in our changes that we've changed the order ID type and the show orders. But since we can put it in one place and reuse it everywhere, we essentially refactored 44 lines of code to 1. And this is what you should strive for most of the time. Take a bunch of code and refactor it to as minimal code as possible for this specific controller. I hope you find this video useful, and see you on the next videos.